who is Nicole Schoer, and is giving up her precious evening for a talk titled Accelerating Mental Health Research, Open Science and Data Sharing Using the CAMH BrainHealth Databank. Nicole is the Manager of Research Data Lifecycle and Standardization at the Krembil Centre of Neuroinformatics in Toronto, Canada, with expertise in research methods, data analysis, and a strong commitment to improving mental health care. Nicole is dedicated to bridging the gap between research findings and real-world applications. And prior to this role, she contributed to impactful work as a research methods specialist in geriatric studies, a public health epidemiologist focused on alcohol-related harms research, and a research coordinator on RTMS and depression studies. Mate, it's a pretty good wrap. Nicole holds a Bachelor of Science in Mental Health and Applied Statistics from the University of Toronto and a Master of Science in Epidemiology and Biostatistics from Western University. And in a moment, I will stop sharing my screen and ask Nicole if she can share her slides.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for that introduction. All right. Everything good? You can see it?
Seems perfect to me, my friend.
Okay, great. Let's get started. So hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Schoer. I'm streaming live from Toronto, Canada. It is currently midnight here, so hope you guys are up and ready for an exciting day, though. Currently, I work at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, known as CAMH in Toronto. So a mental health hospital. Right now, I am the manager of research data lifecycle and standardization, and I'm currently managing CAMH's electronic data repository known as the BrainHealth Databank. So today, I'm going to, I'm just trying to switch slides, there we go, discuss a few topics, so mainly open science at CAMH and within Canada. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the clinical data side of the BrainHealth Databank, and then we'll get into the research data side, including the repository data sharing and then accessing this data for secondary use. So first, I'm going to give you some context to what open science looks like within Canada right now. So Canada, in March 2021, the Tri-Agency, which is the umbrella term used to describe Canadian government research funding agencies, there's three of them, CIHR, which is Canadian Institute of Health Research, NSERC, which is Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, and then SSHRC, which is Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. So these three funding agencies, or the Tri-Agency is what they're called, released a statement of principles on digital data management in March 2021 in order to basically promote open science. So this principle stated that data should be publicly accessible, secure, curated in a repository or platform for reuse by others. It also stipulated that research institutions should provide researchers with an environment that enables data stewardship practices, as well as deliver or support access to repositories or platforms to preserve, curate, and provide continued access to the research data. So this is back in March 2021 that these federal granting agencies were trying to promote, support, research, open science, etc. Following that, the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, which is in the US, so America, they are also a big granting agency. They released in January 2023 a data management and sharing policy, which basically states that each study that used their funding needed to prospectively plan for how data will be managed and shared via a data management and sharing plan. This is now a required part of the funding application or proposal, and they are required to carry out said data management and sharing plan as outlined as a term and condition of the award money, and they have to provide updates in progress reports. So these were two very, what's the right word? They very much kind of simulated a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about later in this presentation. but they really drove change in kind of research data management and open science. In tandem with that, I'm not going to say before or after, I think it was probably around the same time, but this has been an idea for a long time. The Tenenbaum Open Science Institute, they have an open science support and partnership framework. Basically, other institutions can partner with them and adopt open science practices and principles, kind of create an alliance of neuroscience research institutes across Canada committed to open science. So CAMH entered a partnership with TOSI, T-O-S-I, in December 2023. TOSI is based out of McGill in Quebec, Canada. And there's, I believe, 4 or 5 other partnered organizations as well. And partnering with them led to the development of 6 open science principles at CAMH. So as part of committing to open science, CAMH has formally adopted these 6 open science principles. So at the top, number 1, publicly release research outputs, both positive and negative findings following the FAIR principles, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, while ensuring dignity, privacy, and rights of research participants. Number 2, so going, I guess, clockwise, integrate transparency in research partnerships. So all publications, scientific resources from research partnerships will adhere to principle 1, which is releasing the outputs, with open sharing prioritized, and all partners must agree to CAMH's open science principles at the start of collaborative research as well. Number 3 is adopting open science across CAMH. So CAMH is committed to promoting knowledge creation and innovation through its research centers, which will support open science principles. Principle 4 is maximizing global impact. So CAMH prioritizes translating research discoveries to improve global health, viewing open science as a key strategy to enhance collaboration and minimize barriers. Principle 5 is supporting the autonomy of its stakeholders by recognizing rights to decline participation in open science research, and particularly for patients that are also participants, they can decline participating without affecting the quality of clinical care they receive. And finally, principle 6, supporting training and educational resources to enhance understanding of open science and promote the development of expertise in open science best practices as well. And just overall, by implementing open science, CAMH is aiming to improve prevention, diagnosis, treatment for mental illnesses and addictions like depression, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, for example. And as I'm sure this group is probably already aware, there's many, many benefits of open research data. So some of them are obvious, but all of these benefits are the reason that these policies and these principles were developed, right? So this is, the overall goal of everyone being interested in promoting open science is to encourage, global scientific community collaboration, share information, infrastructure, tools, basically just for greater discovery and cooperation as well. So just quickly, for those who are more new to open science, I'm just going to talk a bit about the benefits. So I think one of the most important benefits is enhanced transparency. Others can verify findings, we can reproduce findings, improved reliability, ethical transparency, encouraging ethical research practices, accelerated discovery and fostering innovation, building on existing work more quickly, new ideas and innovations via shared resources, efficient use of resources, prevent duplication of efforts, can increase our impact, more likely to be cited, shared, used if you're participating in open science. There's increased collaboration between researchers, institutions, and disciplines, wider accessibility, more available to a global audience, particularly underserved communities or organizations. And it also engages with the public more. Public can engage with research if the data is open. So now I'm going to start talking a bit more about the BrainHealth Databank specifically. So first I'm going to touch just briefly on clinical data, and the rest of the presentation is going to be all research related data. But because we are a hospital, we do now have access to very rich clinical data, but that is mostly because there were steps taken in the past that have allowed us to use said clinical data for open science and discovery. So basically the overall goal is just convergence of data, so bringing together all available information about individuals and their mental health journeys. So one of the things we've done is increase digital support for measurement-based care. So this is providing tools necessary to collect like harmonized data, like clinical, biosamples, genetic, brain imaging, creating the systems and supports to enable folks to use that in their regular care processes. Another thing we've done is integrate research measures into care pathways. So basically measures that were more commonly research-based. We found not a way, but we've encouraged clinicians to use some of them, for example, different types of questionnaires within their clinical visits, as it is a way to integrate, research outcomes into clinical visits as well. And then another thing we've done is that using clinical data, we've used that data to do our like AI and data-driven personalized care. So just more advanced analytics, visualization, machine learning with this data, for example, supporting diagnosis, prediction, interventions. And then finally, step 4 is the open science for discovery and innovation, which is just basically our digital repository providing high quality data to accelerate research and computational discovery. Sorry, I just need to cough. I'm going to mute for 1 second. Thank you. Sorry about that. So now step 4 is kind of where we're at with the research side of the BrainHealth Databank. Before I launch into that, I'm just going to touch a bit about the things that we've done with the clinical data. So in the clinical data sphere, we've created are digital pathways or integrated care pathways. So for different areas of mental health, there are certain types of questionnaires basically related to depression or anxiety, disability. And this Venn diagram here shows that, for example, in geriatrics, we're assessing for both anxiety and depression. For folks with PTSD, we assess depression and disability. And then in between, there's a bunch of care pathways that use all of these measures. So just basically collecting similar data on different in different care pathways within CAMH, but that allows us to combine data from different care pathways and compare outcomes as well. So by using common data elements like this, we've collected data from over 35,000 patients and have over almost 13 million data points from having these common data elements. And similarly, by integrating these research measures and using common data elements, we've also created patient dashboards where they can track their progress with different symptoms or outcomes depending on the care pathway, and they can access and see these scores over time. There's also physician dashboards as well, where they can see other similar types of information and track patients' progress. And overall, this is a really cool thing because we are now at the point where we can start considering combining patient information and participant information. So this graph, this kind of looks confusing, but either read it from left to right or right to left, but essentially someone could start as a participant in a research study. And then for whatever reason, is admission or seeks like outpatient care, for example, and becomes a patient. But by integrating all of these things together in the clinical sense, we could use their participant data as like predictors to what potentially led to them, interacting as a patient or vice versa. they started as a patient and then are participating in research, we could use some of their information from their clinical experience to supplement their participant journey and just have more rich data source as well. All right, I'm gonna now switch over into the research data sphere. So while the BrainHealth Databank does have clinical data as a portion of it, I feel like the most open science part of the BrainHealth Databank is the actual research repository. So the BrainHealth Databank serves as our institutional digital research data repository. And then it also has kind of a dual purpose of a platform for data sharing and reuse of data. So basically all research studies done at the hospital need to deposit their data in the research repository. It's considered mandatory from March 2023 onwards. And it's just basically de-identified research data that is expected to be slightly cleaned, but it's just for responsible data management, long-term storage. The second portion is the data sharing and reuse of data, which is part that facilitates more open science. Investigators are encouraged to, but not required to share their data for secondary use, and it does require participant consent to share their data. Basically, participants have to opt into it. So the repository is mandatory, it's just responsible data management, whereas the secondary use part is optional and requires consent. So a bit more about the repository. Basically, any electronic data that is associated with a research study at CAMH gets put into this repository. It's all de-identified. We also use GitLab as standard internal repository for code maintenance. So any code related to project data will be deposited to GitLab. There are exceptions to this. If there's ethical, cultural, legal, or commercial obligations, then folks are not required to put their data in the repository. We encourage deposits every 6 months, or at least annually at minimum, up until the final deposit at the time of publication. We try to link data to persistent digital identifier like DOI or ORCID IDs for researchers as well. We do not collect like preclinical, molecular, biological samples in the repository as well. Basically what happens is folks collect their data however they would like to. We've got some imaging, some molecular genetics, questionnaires, wearables data, and folks can collect their research data however they wish. We have our existing institutional systems. They can use those if they want, but we meet with them to discuss how they've collected the data, and then we stage it in what's called our neuroinformatics platform. Basically, we organize the data and link all the data sources together and assign a project code and just have everything organized on our end. And then once that's done, the data gets copied into the repository storage. Our neuroinformatics platform, which is basically the main part, I guess, of the repository, is just a database infrastructure that links all sources of data. So you'd have your imaging data, your like genetic, molecular data, any questionnaires, survey data, for example. So we use XNAT, LabKey, and REDCap as kind of our major storage for those types of data. And in the neuroinformatics platform, we just create like linked tables in the backend to connect all that data together. Just makes it much easier for analytics and visualization as well. Part of our neuroinformatics platform involves having a standard naming convention. This is just to ensure that we're a pretty big hospital, so just to make sure that all the data in the platform uses a similar format, and every single participant has their own individual ID as well. So when you're looking in the back end in the neuroinformatics platform, everything is organized and unique. So you can see here we assign individual project codes, study codes, site codes and then subject codes for every single participant that gets entered into the repository. We also collect some identifying information. This is to manage the consent process for secondary use. So when folks go deposit in the repository, if they're sharing for secondary use, they also have to submit this information about their participants. It allows us to create what we call a BrainHealth Databank ID, which allows us to link participants between studies. So if they participate in more than one study, we could link their data from multiple sources together. Right now in the repository, we have, I'll show you some numbers in a bit, but different types of data. So survey, clinical assessments, imaging, and molecular genetics. These are just like a handful of the studies that are in there right now. We have some, right now, we have almost 3,000 participants in the repository, a good number of clinical assessments, some survey data, 90 MRIs, 200 PET scans, and 360 folks with molecular or genetics information. I'm currently tracking all of these studies. So we have 24 in the works right now, getting all their data staged and set up in neuroinformatics platform before we copy it over. We have 15 more coming up at the end of the year. I think in January to March of next year, we're expecting about 30 more. So it's just starting to take off and is only going to get busier from here on out. And now I'm going to move on to data sharing. So the setup for sharing your data involves participants signing consent form. There's one for data, and then if the study does biosamples, they have to sign a different consent form for that. So we separate data and biosamples. Depending on which one they sign, if it's data, we take the principal investigator, I guess, can decide if they want to create a defined data set that is accessible to external researchers, so non-CAMH folks. Otherwise, it just goes in the customized data set area, and then biosamples are just leftover samples from the study, and they get stored in our biobank for internal researchers to request use for. Yeah, so it's an opt-in. You have to do consent. It's just the most like safe and secure way to allow folks to have control over their data. And yeah, sorry, I'll show you the consent form. So we have two versions. So again, one for data that's included in the main original study consent form. And then we also have a biosample one, which is a second separate consent form. We currently do not allow only biosamples to be consented to. So if participants consent to data, then they can consent to biosamples. But if they say no to data, then we do not allow them to consent to biosamples. We're also only doing prospective consent only, so ongoing or new participants from the time of adding this consent form language to the study. Right now, I think we have about 10 studies using the secondary consent language. Well, 10 to 15, we're trying to get more accurate numbers, but yeah, so it'll be really cool to see what data comes from that. In interest of time, I'm going to skip this slide, but basically, because we're doing perspective only, there's a lot of conversations of whether or not it's worth it to add it to an ongoing study. So yeah, we cannot, we don't do like a waiver of consent or anything for previous participants. So it would only be current and future participants, and anyone who's completed the study, the data would not be allowed to be shared for secondary use. In terms of accessing said data that will be available for secondary reuse, this is the process. You can browse what's called our BHDB portal to see available data sets. So there's defined data sets that are available to external researchers. And then there's also an Explorer dashboard, which allows you to kind of create a more customized data set that just shows aggregated data based on like demographics, for example, some sub-sample characteristics. You have to create an RAB application and also the application to the BrainHealth Databank. And once both of those are approved, then we will allow you to download the data from the BHDB portal. Before any data set gets released, we do an additional risk of re-identification analysis. So basically just moving all small counts into missing data so that the risk of re-identification is even lower. And this is what our BHDB portal will look like. It's not officially launched yet, but this is kind of how individual studies will be shown on one of the main landing pages. And then when you click into studies, you can see some more aggregate information about the studies, like participant demographics, diagnoses, etc. A brief description of the study. Eventually, there will be this Explorer dashboard for internal folks that allows you to combine participants from multiple studies at once and see aggregated data from that as well. That just requires a bit more standardization to make sure all the variables line up in a way that you can filter and see aggregate data well. All right, and that is the end. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions. And if there are no questions, then this is the lovely building that we will be, Crumble Center will be moving to in maybe 2027. CAMH is expanding, which is really exciting.